This is Nasha Kasha, a Ukrainian almanac, 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. Nasha Kasha is heard on 19 campus and community radio stations from Newfoundland to British Columbia. I'm your reporter Stefan Andrusiak, and this is episode 233. This report spans 3 years. It's the story of Canadian soldier Filip Konowal. He was a First World War Victoria Cross recipient, the only recipient to have been born in Eastern Europe. The story is also about efforts to honor him in London, Ontario. And you'll learn about that little bit of Konowal's pre-Canadian past some Ukrainians would rather not acknowledge. Why Do You Weep? Why Do You Lament? It's from the UNESCO collection of the Folkways Project at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. The chant was performed by a folk ensemble from the Khmelnytsky region in Podillia in Ukraine. Filip Konowal was born in that area. His is just one story of valor, as we in Canada honor all soldiers, past and present, on this Remembrance Day 2020. Filip was born into a peasant family on March 25, 1887. His Ukrainian village was called Kutkiu, and it was just east of the Zbruch River. Now, the Zbruch was a boundary separating Ukrainian lands then occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire from those within Tsarist Russia. Konowal's village was on the Russian-occupied bank of the Zbruch. At an early age, he worked as a mason alongside his father. He married Hannah in 1908. They had a daughter named Marichka. Soon after his marriage, he began his service in the Imperial Russian Army. There, he led classes as an instructor in hand-to-hand combat. After demobilization, Konowal returned home and took up work felling trees. He signed up with the Canadian Lumber Company in 1913. He crossed the Pacific Ocean to Vancouver, and there he would continue cutting trees for the lumber industry. Work ran out. Konowal made his way east. By 1914, the First World War had begun. On the 12th of July, 1915, Konowal enlisted in the 77th Canadian Infantry Battalion, and on the 19th of June, 1916, he left Halifax for Liverpool. Konowal was promoted to acting corporal. Then he transferred to the 47th British Columbia Battalion of the 4th Canadian Division. I'm about to quote from a report published in the Globe and Mail, April 4th, 2017. The reporter, Roy McGregor. Quote, "The Victoria Cross was granted to then acting Corporal Konowal for his incredible bravery during the Battle of Hill 70 in August 1917. This ferocious little Ukrainian Canadian killed at least 16 German soldiers. Impatient at being held down by enemy fire, the corporal had stormed alone out of his trench. His captain, so convinced that Konowal was deserting, that he actually took a shot at the Canadian soldier, fortunately missing. A day later, with Konowal now dragged away from the battle lines unconscious, a rifle bullet having disfigured much of the left side of his face, any thoughts of a court-martial were gone. Instead, he was recommended for the highest military honor in the British Empire, the Victoria Cross." End quote. The war was over. Konowal was back in Canada. On the 19th of July, 1919, Konowal accompanied Leonid Didik, a friend of his and a fellow veteran, to a particularly rough area in Hull, Quebec. The two men went for dinner to a restaurant. Didik then left early in order to look at some bicycles at the home of William Artich. He was an Austrian bootlegger and a bicycle salesman. A fight had started between Artich and Didik, By the time Konowal arrived, Didik had been viciously beaten and Artich was armed with a knife. Konowal managed to gain control over the weapon and he killed Artich with one single stab to the chest. Konowal did not attempt to flee the scene. When police came, the First World War veteran stated, "I've killed 52 of them. That makes 53. After extensive tests, it was discovered that Konowal had suffered from serious medical problems stemming from his war wounds. Pressure on his brain was increasing, and his condition was continually deteriorating. Medical experts testified unanimously agreeing that a wartime gunshot wound to the head was likely making Konowal mentally unstable, causing him flashbacks to the war's battles. The jury agreed, and he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Then he was institutionalized for 7 years. By the end of this period, his condition had improved dramatically, and he was released from a Montreal mental hospital in 1928. Konowal eventually found employment as a caretaker at the House of Commons in Ottawa with the help of a military associate. When Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King saw the colors of the Victoria Cross ribbon on Konowal while he was at work, King arranged for him to be reassigned to a lifetime job in King's personal office. Filip Konowal died in 1959 in Hull, Quebec. He was 70 years old. You're listening to the violin sonata Ballada con Moro by Leos Janáček, written between 1914 and 1915, and it was performed by violinist Karysa Klopuszczak and pianist Philip Chu. It's from their CD entitled Sound Worlds. Also, from that period, the song Oh What a Lovely War by Cortland and Jeffries. The battle sounds you heard under my voice were sourced from the Imperial War Museum in England. You also heard Evan Wish, who composed and performed the melody, and What If. Part 2 of our story takes place in London, Ontario, early in 2017. Attendees at a Ukrainian-Canadian Congress branch executive meeting were reminded of Filip Konowal's story and of 2 anniversaries, 100 years since the taking of Hill 70, 100 years since Konowal was awarded the Victoria Cross.
Victor
Verzhanovsky was at that meeting. Pan Verzhanovsky comes from the same region as Konowal.
Я протягом 42 років працював в Національному університеті професором хімії.
He taught university chemistry in Khmelnytsky, Ukraine. That's about 80 kilometers from the war hero's place of birth. But before coming to Canada, Mr. Verzhanovsky had never heard of Filip Konowal.
Я узнав вже тут, і я пишаюсь тим, що я є земляком Пилипа Коновала, адже я родом із Хмельницької, бувшої Кам'янець-Подільської губернії, і село Кутківці, звідки походить Пилип Коновал, знаходиться зовсім недалеко від міста Хмельницького, десь порядка від 80 до 100 кілометрів.
Pan Victor was so moved by the story that he prepared a bit of research, and he presented it to his friends and colleagues.
Що вам найбільш імпонувало про його історію?
Мені більше всього імпонувало, що це був простий.
I asked Pan Victor what impressed him most about Konowal. He says that it was that he was but an ordinary young man in a difficult time, looking for a way out, looking for a way to maneuver a troubled world.
Життя на цей час було надзвичайно складне.
And that he found within himself a way to rise to an occasion
to muster great bravery.
Це велика людина, і я думаю, що зараз і Україна, і Хмельницький, зокрема його село, вшановує його пам'ять. Я думаю, хочу дізнатись, але впевнений, що крім меморіальної дошки, йому повинні поставити на батьківщині пам'ятник.
Mr. Verzhinovsky believes that in Ukraine, in his hometown, they should build Konowal a monument. But what about us, here, in London, in Canada? Stories had been circulating. Years ago, a tree had been planted in Victoria Park, which is across from London's City Hall. Some in the community recalled that that tree had been dedicated to Konowal. Dedicated, but where is it today? For it seems it has disappeared.
Hello, Stephanie.
Hi, yes,
Hi,
nice to meet
nice
you.
to meet
Probably
you.
nice to meet you and put a face to the
And
name.
so it was that I myself volunteered to do some research. My mission, find the tree.
All right, let's check this one here. Sorry, it's going to be a little bit of a runner, but it is in this area. My name is Stephanie Wilson. I'm a project coordinator in the Environmental and Parks Planning Division. We look after the commemorative program as well as the planning and design and construction of the entire open space system.
And you've been with the city for how long?
It'll be 4 years this fall.
Do you know what species of tree you're looking for?
I thought it was a maple, which this is not, but it's worth checking the ones in this vicinity. That one right there. It is a maple. Perfect. So one Ukrainians, isn't that?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay.
So let me compare that against just to confirm before we get going.
So you're looking at something from your records?
Yes, so Victoria Park is one of the City of London's oldest parks, and it's got a lot of dedications within it, monuments, entries, and the like. And because it dates so far back, it sort of predates our modern records. We don't always have a full history of each one of these dedications. So a few years back, we had I think a volunteer. I wasn't at the city at the time, but I believe it was a volunteer who dedicated their time to going through some of the plaques in the park and sort of inventorying some of these things, and that helped us locate the tree today. It let us know what the plaque looked like and what the dedication was all about.
You know, the Ukrainian community thought that it had dried up or had been replaced or had just simply gone away.
So our original files indicated that it was somewhere closer to Central Avenue, further to the north. So we went looking for it in that location and didn't see it. And it's unusual for the city to not replace a commemorative tree, but we didn't know what had happened. So it could have been anything from, the tree itself contacting some sort of disease, or it could have been an accident. There's lots of events in Victoria Park every year. A truck could have, hit it. It could have been one of a number of things. But now we are standing close to the northeast corner at the moment. This is where we are, but we're closer to the center of the park, near inside the major pathway loop. So we were thinking that maybe it was relocated to a safer spot. That could have been the reason. And here it is, which is great because it's actually in really, really good shape. Beautiful maple tree.
It turns out that the tree, now found safe and thriving, was planted to commemorate not Konowal, but the centenary of Ukrainian settlement in Canada. It says so right there on the plaque at the foot of the tree. So, we have a tree. The city did indeed honor our Ukrainian community, but what about Filip Konowal? How can we honor him?
І коли настане рано, світ накриє білий сніг, і земля загоїть рани, ми згадаємо про них, про всі, час застигне на хвилину, і не поможуть тут слова, а в очах його дитини так нестримно заблищить сльоза. Про них співає вітер в полях, запам'ятає земля. Їх шлях освітить рання зоря. Про них, кого забрала війна.
Yes, my name's Peter Sochan Petrosochan. I'm from London, Ontario. I grew up here. I moved away, came back after almost 40 years of living in different locations, including 10 years in Ukraine, working as an economic advisor.
Now, Konowal is a heroic figure, but he's also somewhat of a tragic figure. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, you're quite right. He's, I guess, an exemplary candidate to demonstrate what PTSD can do to soldiers after the war.
Post-traumatic
Stress syndrome, correct. It was recognized that he was having flashbacks and that he was reliving his World War I experiences, was mixing them up and couldn't tell them apart. He was having difficulty surviving. Personal tragedies also continued. He had left his wife behind prior to World War I, had intended to bring her over from Ukraine, which was part of Tsarist Russia at that time. And World War I interrupted, and then we had the Bolshevik Revolution, communist regime. We know that his wife died in Siberia in the 1930s. He had a daughter with his first wife, who I believe he never saw. He did get married a second time in Canada, but his life was a very scattered piece of work.
How unusual, from your knowledge, was it for someone of Ukrainian heritage to be in the Canadian Armed Forces?
It's a very good question because his experience was very unique in the Ukrainian-Canadian community. First of all, because he was born within the territory that was defined as Tsarist Russia. He went into the Tsarist Russian army. In World War I, the Canadian government looked at people of Ukrainian origin who had normally been from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and defined many of them as enemy aliens. As a result, many of them were put into detention camps.
The internment.
The internment camps, that's correct. On the other hand, Konowal, because he had not been born under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but under Tsarist Russia, which was an ally at that time of Canada's, was an acceptable person. And when he applied to join the Canadian military, he was welcomed.
That's the answer.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It was very unique. Now, he had also military experience. He had been a bayonet instructor. So he was a man who's skilled in the military trade, if you like.
It now connects that he captured and demolished the German side that was in his sights using a bayonet.
Which is an extraordinary feat.
Flash forward to the tree in Victoria Park. We found a tree. It wasn't, as first thought, in tribute to Konowal. It was there for to commemorate Ukrainian settlement in Canada, still a tree. You, however, felt it was really important to specifically commemorate Konowal.
In Ukraine, I remember when the Canadian embassy made a big to-do about it in the mid-1990s to place a marker in his hometown to establish that this was a Ukrainian who had come to Canada, had won a Victoria Cross. So we thought we'd put up another tree in Victoria Park, which is the central area in London, Ontario.
Now, I have a confession to make. I was part of that committee. I said, okay, it's not for that purpose, but we have a tree. It's a tree. It's dedicated to Ukrainians in the London area. And you said, no, it's not good enough.
Yes, I did, and I really liked the words. We went and spoke to several people who remembered or may have remembered vaguely the history of what had happened the first time around.
Mykola Vasilko.
Vasilko, thanks. And his comment was, well, geez, this is an opportunity.
To be clear, Victoria Park is full of trees, and they've decided enough trees already. So unless it's something really, really special, it's probably the answer would be no. So one way or another, if there is another tribute for anybody who might want to do this, it would be in another park.
It's been so overloaded and everybody wants to have a tree there, whereas other areas of the city require trees and planting.
So off Veterans Parkway is this new park for veterans.
It's called Remembrance Gardens.
What will the planting in Filip Konowal's memory look like?
The centerpiece will be a large, rough-cut granite stone. Konowal's name, of course, his enlistment in both the Tsar's Russian forces and in the Canadian, because they're relevant. His duties, the units to which he belonged in true military fashion. Now, on the sides of this grandstone, which will be about 1.5 meters high and about 1 meter wide, will be what are in Ukrainian called kalina. They are a galder bush, the European version, and in Canada there is a similar strain called a high cranberry bush. That is almost a traditional symbol of Ukraine. It is seen everywhere. And behind it will be a red oak tree. Oak is the symbol of strength.
Oak in Ukrainian would be dub.
That's correct.
And kalina, the broad translation of kalina is cranberry.
The Canadian version, yes.
We remember everybody presently fighting in the forces, and especially those who gave their lives as soldiers of the Canadian Armed Forces. Thanks for remembering this one story, this one tiny piece of that larger legacy on this time of remembrance. And if you're in Remembrance Gardens, look for the cranberries.
That's correct.
And that is where we left my friend Petro and this story in 2017. The month of August and the centenary of the Battle for Hill 70 was rapidly approaching. The opportunity to honor that battle's hero in a tiny city-owned park on the southeast corner of Veteran Memorial Parkway and River Road was also imminent, and Petro was determined to accomplish his goal. Now, more than 3 years have passed. I'm recording this on Remembrance Day, November 11th, 2020. Konowal's memorial is a 5-foot-tall, handsome granite with a flat-etched face. His name, rank, the name of his battalion, the 47th, his years of Canadian military service, 1914 to 1919, are all there. And, of course, a Victoria Cross emblem. It being here is all the more remarkable because most Canadian cities with much larger Ukrainian populations display no mention of Filip Konowal. Had Petro Sochань not located this small military garden, had he not negotiated with the park's director to include the Ukrainian-Canadian hero among the cadre of soldiers honored here, Konowal's monument would not be standing in London today. Placing the monument here required compliance. The park's manager made it clear. No monument would be approved without listing Konowal's full military service role. The inscription had to attest to all service, including Konowal's earlier participation in the Tsar's Imperial Russian Army. Petro knew that he would raise eyebrows, even perhaps hurt some feelings. Putin had invaded and occupied Crimea only a year before, and Russian regulars were in eastern Ukraine fighting and killing Ukrainian soldiers. But Konowal was in the Tsar's army, a Tsar who was murdered by the Bolsheviks, an army that no longer exists in that previous form. Tasked with getting the job done, with no time to call a meeting for more debate, reluctantly, Petro felt he had to agree. The day of the unveiling arrived. An Orthodox and a Catholic priest jointly blessed Konowal's rock. Soldiers representing Konowal's regiment elevated the military gravitas of the moment. All of it crescendoed with 50 voices of varying ages and singing abilities delivering O Canada and Szczeno Merlo Ukraina loudly, lovingly. And of course there was food. The holy water was still glistening off of Konowal's name when the accusatory questions began. "We're acknowledging Russians," I heard one man say, "on a monument our community paid for," another accused. Members of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress branch executive in London, I among them, debated and finally voted. The CEO and Executive Director of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress's head office in Ottawa is Ihor Mikhalchyshin. Ihor writes, quote, "We've supported the work of the UCC London branch to respond to concerns about the monument. It takes a special kind of brazen boldness to grind, to expunge part of a war hero's service roll out of consecrated granite. Professionally executed, the Russian reference sandblasted out of existence. Today, the monument stands and looks all but untouched. At its foot, for Konowal, a wreath and a little cross bearing someone's handwritten thank you. Behind the rock, a cranberry tree, the one we call Kalina."
We pray that their offering of their lives may not have been in vain. May your grace enable us this day to dedicate ourselves to the cause of justice, freedom, and peace, and give us the wisdom and strength to build a better world. Amen.
Солдати, а навкруг шумлять жита.
You're listening to the theater group Jerala from Ukraine, the song Stepom Stepom. It's about the casualties of war.
Степом, степом поросли бері.